You're listening to the Sisters in Loss podcast, a faith-based grief and loss podcast for Black women, where you will hear stories of miscarriage, infant loss, stillbirth, and infertility to learn there is a testimony in tragedy. You will learn how to heal, gain clarity, find hope and peace, and turn your pain into your purpose after loss. I'm your host, Erica M. McAfee.
Well, thank you so much, Jessica, for being on the podcast.
Well, thank you for having me.
So I want to start our interviews with you sharing a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Okay. I love to tell people that I am a native Pittsburgher who has traveled the United States. I currently live in Maryland with my husband and our 2 children. I am an educator. I was previously a classroom teacher for 12 years and currently a school administrator. Not big time, but like middle of the road administrator. So I've been teaching or in education for close to 15 years and just love interacting with students of all ages, and am a student myself. I love to learn, love to research, love to gain new knowledge and insight. So I think that's probably why I'm most passionate about the field of education. So that is, if you want more, I can tell you more, but that's, I think, me in a nutshell.
Oh, that's awesome. So go ahead and just take us on your journey to motherhood and just tell us about your loss story, your secondary infertility journey.
So my husband and I are actually high school sweethearts. We dated in high school and broke up when we went to college, but got back together maybe when we were a sophomore and junior in college. And from there, graduated from college and got back together and decided to get married. We got married in 2008 and I wanted kids right away. He was like, I don't know. And happenstance during a winter snowstorm, I got pregnant. And so we weren't doing anything different, but I got pregnant fairly easily, had a great pregnancy with my daughter. She was born in October of 2008. We, at that time, lived in North Carolina and had talked about, spacing our kids out and trying to figure out our next, endeavors and careers and being new parents. And a few weeks before my daughter turned 1, I found out I was pregnant with my son, which was, oh my God, I can't believe this. This wasn't supposed to happen this way. But there he was. And we were pregnant. I had him in June of 2012, and we thought that our family was complete and we're going about our days and our lives and, doing everything that parents with small kids did. And in June of 2015, I found out that I was pregnant again. My husband had some mixed emotions about it. I was happy. We had done about a year's worth of pre-marriage counseling in which we said we would love to have 3 kids. So I was like, here we are, 3 kids. It wasn't planned and it wasn't perfect, but here we are, the end of, our growing our family journey. Well, it wasn't that way. At about 6 weeks, I was actually at a conference and I started to have a miscarriage. And so I took myself to the emergency room and, I was told that I was having a spontaneous miscarriage and that it was nothing to be alarmed about, that this happens, and, just to make a follow-up visit with my doctor. Well, I was completely mortified and everything else that comes along with having a miscarriage because they tell you not to worry, but you're like, are you kidding? This is a big deal. The other part of this is that no one knew. Just me and my husband, we decided, we were going to wait until we were closer to the second trimester to announce to family and friends. So all in a day, I had to call my mom and explain to her not only was I pregnant, but I was having a miscarriage, which took her completely by surprise and blindsided her. And my husband explained the same thing to his family. And it was just a whirlwind of emotions. And we just couldn't figure out what was going on. The best part of that situation is that I wasn't in school. I was on summer break. And so I got some time, or should have taken the time, but I did have the time to not really deal with it. And I didn't. I didn't deal with it at all. I was like, they said it's a 20% chance that, pregnancies, this is not a big deal. You're going to move on. You're going to get through this. You're going to get pregnant again. And that's it. So I didn't really grieve. I was probably more so embarrassed about it because I didn't know anyone who had difficulty getting pregnant or hadn't had a miscarriage or anything like that. I just was like, this shouldn't happen to you. You have to pick yourself up and move on. And so we did. And a huge part of that was not dealing with the grief started to take a toll on my relationship with my husband, who was also dealing with grief. His father had passed away and his grandmother had passed away. And then we had had this miscarriage. And so we weren't grieving properly. And one of the best things that we decided to do was at our church during Thanksgiving, they have a service for family members who couldn't be there for you during this holiday season. And my husband and I lit a candle for his dad and grandmother and for the baby that we had lost. And so then we decided, you know what, let's take it a step further. We probably need to get some counseling. We're not afraid of counseling. We just hadn't thought of it. And so we went and got some marriage counseling. I don't necessarily think our marriage was in trouble, but I think it had the signs of if you don't get some help or have, some wise counsel, it could go down that road. And so we got the counseling, and from there, we started to work on communication issues, and we started to work on processing grief because we had experienced a lot of it. And in the midst of doing all of this, we had to talk to each other about, wanting to finish, trying to have another child or to put it on the back burner and not do anything about it. And in the midst of that conversation, I ended up getting pregnant again. And so with that, my doctor's office had warned me, I think the timing was June 2015, and I found out I was pregnant in March of 2016. And so when I found out I was pregnant, my doctor's office told me that I needed to call them as soon as, I got pregnant because of a miscarriage, and they wanted to see me as soon as possible. So I go in for the 6-week visit. And while I'm there, the sonogram ultrasound tech, we could see a heartbeat, but it was so tiny and it was so rapid that they couldn't get the numbers. And so they were like, it looks good. We're just going to have you come back in about 3 weeks. The baby should be bigger and we should be able to get a better picture, a better heartbeat sound or whatever it is that they call it. And so I was excited, went back home, talked to my husband. We were so excited. Still hadn't necessarily shared with anybody. It was only 6 weeks. And those 3 weeks we were, kicking it through. I was telling him, oh my goodness, this is the baby that we've wanted. And at 10 weeks, we go back to the doctor's office, my husband and I, this time together, and the sonogram technician cannot find a baby, cannot find a heartbeat in front of my husband, and he is having a rough time. And so for me, I wasn't necessarily grieving. I was trying to make sure that he was okay. And it was like it happened all over again. We left there again in a state of shock. This time around, I do believe that we let family know beforehand because we were nervous, but we were excited. And so we had to call our family members again, both moms, and, let them know that we had lost the baby. The issue this time was my body was not responding like the first time. My body was still believing that I was pregnant. And so I had to have D&C, which was really hard because my husband was like, wait a minute, we lost this baby and now we have to have this surgery. And of course, they're talking about, with any surgery, there's always the risk of complications. And so I would say this is the first time in our marriage that we've had to talk through this type of decision to have this type of surgery. All these different emotions are coming about with the both of us. And so unfortunately, this time, it was not the summertime. So I had to talk to my principal at the time, which was hard. I actually took some time off from work. And this time I processed my grief. I was not too familiar with any Facebook groups, but I was looking, searching, Googling things, books, anything that I could get my hands on to process the grief that I was experiencing, because it was easy to grieve my father-in-law. It was easy to grieve my grandmother-in-law, because those are people that I met. And I knew them, I could talk to them, but I couldn't figure out how to grieve something, a person, a baby that I had hoped for, but did not get the chance to meet. And the second one at that. I had no idea how to process that. And, I was asking my doctor about this. And of course, they wanted to put me on medication. But I said, no, I don't think that that's what I'm looking for. I want to experience the grief because that's how you can get through and on to the next. But I want to figure out, how and why this grief is so different. And I came across a book, and the book was so helpful. It was called, I believe, Grieving Someone You've Never Met. And with that, I read that book and I cried and I talked to my husband about it. I prayed. I just let myself mourn my dreams, my hopes for that child, for the one previous, but specifically in that moment, that baby. And it was hard. I mean, I still had my two other kids. I was trying to wrap my brain and my mind around how can I still be an active and loving mommy, but still grieve a loss. Again, I didn't really have too many family members or close friends that had experienced miscarriage. And so it was really a lonely time. And I was trying to figure out who I could talk to. And I will say, if I had any family members who had dealt with this, they didn't want to talk about it or they didn't want to let me know. And so maybe about a month after I had read the book and had given myself the permission to mourn and to grieve, I wrote a post on Facebook about my experience, about wanting to enlarge our family, but not being able to, and my experience with having 2 miscarriages within 10 months and feeling alone, but also feeling hopeful and trying to figure out my next steps. And I just put it all on my heart, put my heart all the way on the internet, which I was really nervous about. And I was also nervous about culturally, we don't necessarily share vulnerable moments because, we want to seem strong all the time, but I shared. And the amount of love and the response that I got was so empowering. And I realized that in that moment, that's what I was supposed to do. I was supposed to share. I got text messages, I got DMs, I got, likes and loves on my posts. But most importantly were the messages from people who maybe I hadn't spoke to in years that were telling me, I wish I had your courage. I just experienced a loss like this a year ago, last month. I mean, it was a lot of virtual, at least for me, hugs, that there were women out there who were going through this, didn't want to say anything because they were kind of like me, embarrassed or scared or fearful, but let me know. And I was important enough to them for them to let me know what their experience was. And so that got me on a journey of trying to figure out how I could continue to encourage, but also to heal, to take the moments to mourn whenever I think about, due dates or potential birth dates or milestones that I would be going through. And I tried to do it with grace. I tried to do it with, poise. I don't know. And I don't even know if that's even possible. I know there were moments, and there still are moments, when I just cry because that's just a part of it. I don't think grief is ever anything that you necessarily get over, but it's something that you deal with when it comes. And then, at least for me, now I can smile about it. And I smile because I never thought that I would be able to get to a place where I could acknowledge that this is a part of my story. So that was in 2016. We were living in North Carolina. We didn't really have any setbacks from my doctor. They told us nothing. I went back and asked questions. And of course, I was told, well, if you want us to do anything diagnostic, it would be very expensive. And even then, we are not going to be able to give you any definitive answers. You have 2 other kids. You get pregnant. This is just the luck of your draw. We're not really concerned or worried. It doesn't seem like there's anything out of the ordinary. You just have to keep trying. And I said to myself, okay, by this time, I was already in my 30s. And so in my mind, I'm like, I know I don't have that much time before I become like a geriatric pregnancy. And so my husband and I are trying to figure out, what is it that we want to do? How are we going to move forward? And so from 2006 all the way until the end of 2017, I did not get pregnant at all. We weren't prohibiting it. I was trying to figure out my cycle, but no pregnancy, no scare of a pregnancy, nothing. Until one day I was at a doctor's appointment with my daughter, and we had to give family history. And the nurse who I was talking to said to me, you could have some infertility issues. And I said to her, well, what would make you say that? And she was like, think about it. You've been trying to have another baby or not prohibiting having another baby since 2005. And it's 2017, almost 2018, and you've not carried a baby to term. You might have some issues. And I said to myself, you think? And she said, yes. She said, try to see a specialist, try to, get some more information. If you really want to have another baby and you don't get some help, you're basically, setting yourself up to be disappointed, because some of these things are not just going to happen on their own. And so I took that information back to my husband and I looked up a whole bunch of different things. I'm definitely a Google MD type of person. And I was like, oh, I have this and I have this and I have this and I have this. Well, one thing led to another. I ended up seeing a doctor to voice my concerns. And I was referred to a fertility clinic in the DMV where I live. And I went and I met with a specialist, and, they interview you and they say, well, what is the outcome you're looking for? And I told them I'm looking for answers. I said, I don't know if another child is in the cards for me, but I just want to know out of curiosity for my general health. I was having some issues with my cycle. I was having some issues. I wasn't sure if any of this stuff was normal, but, whenever I went to my regular doctor, they never seemed concerned. So when I was at the fertility clinic, they ran some tests like they do, they call them like your entrance, like what's your best way to proceed forward. And it was revealed that I had a fibroid, a submucosal fibroid that was 40% of my uterus. And from that, the reproductive endocrinologist said, this is more than likely the culprit that is prohibiting you from getting pregnant or sustaining pregnancy. And of course, because I had moved from different states, they couldn't tell me if it was ever noticed by any other doctor that I had been seeing before. And so they tell me, we don't operate on this, but this is a common thing. Once you have this removed, you should be all set to go. And for me, I was really excited and I was really happy about the diagnosis, but I was also very concerned and a little bit upset because, why hadn't another doctor before seen this or talked to me about it? When you go and have your initial sonograms when you're first pregnant, they do they try to check for fibroids. And I knew I'd had them, but nobody had said anything about the size or to be concerned about them. So I never paid it any attention at all. And so I was just very curious about, the level of care that I had received or the answers that I was not given or, any of that type of stuff. It just, for me, was because I had already had children, and already I was able to get pregnant. There was no issue. And nobody for me seemed to be concerned about why these things were happening. I mean, I even had one doctor tell me, well, if you would have just stopped having kids with your second baby, you would have never experienced this. And I just was like, really? Like, that's what you say to patients? And so, there was that part of me that was like, well, should I stop? Like, how do I go forward through this? Like, is it maybe I'm only supposed to have 2 kids? I don't know. But I will tell you, having the answers and having a potential solution was probably the most excited I have been about my health, but also my reproductive health in a long time. I mean, in 2018, we got this diagnosis, and within about a month, I was able to schedule surgery to have this treated. And I mean, it was just like one of those things where I thought that, this was going to be it. We would be able to, finally have this rainbow baby, complete our family, and move on. And that was not what happened. I had the surgery to remove my fibroid, and I really had a non-invasive procedure done. So I wasn't technically, there weren't any, they didn't have to go through my belly button or anything like that. It was just non-invasive. And so my recuperation time was only a month. And so when I went to my doctor after I had the procedure for the follow-up visit, at this point, I'm 35, and I was told you have 3 months or 3 cycles to get pregnant. If you don't, we're going to send you back to the fertility clinic. And so I go home to my husband. I'm like, listen, this is what they said. I don't know what that means, but this is what they said. And so we get busy. And we get pregnant. My first cycle after being released from my doctor. And we're excited. We are really, really excited. We, in fact, told, I think, my sister-in-law, because we took the test while we were at our house, and my mom. And then finally, we told my mother-in-law. And the day after we told my mother-in-law, I felt like I was having another spontaneous miscarriage. But the difference with this one was I was having some pain on my side. And so that alarmed me. That was one of the things that was different. And I couldn't, because I hadn't been pregnant for, a while, I was like, well, these are just pregnancy pains. And so I called the doctor on call, and they said, just to be safe, we want you to go to the hospital. So I went to the hospital, and again, they told me that my numbers were off and that, there wasn't a sac that they could see. And, they just were like, you probably just have passed everything and you're having another spontaneous miscarriage. And so, of course, my husband and I are crushed again. Who does this? Who does this happen to? Well, again, we know no families that have had 3 miscarriages after having 2 healthy pregnancies. And the doctor comes back in and says, we want you to come back in 2 days. Your pregnancy hormone levels are really high for us not to see a sac. And so I have no idea what that means. They're not really saying anything. I'm assuming is that they don't want to scare me, but they're not really saying very much. And so I go home. I took a day from work because I'm still trying to process everything. And I go back to the doctor the next day. The next time I go, my levels have not doubled, but have gone up by about 1,000 or maybe 2,000. And this time the doctor says, we see a sac, so maybe you're just having some, a little bit of breakthrough, a bleeding. You're going to be fine. We just want you to follow up with your actual doctor. Which I say, okay. So I'm excited again. Like, okay, this is great. This is awesome. Then the next day, my husband and I go to a regular doctor's appointment. And this time the doctor is, an OB, not like the emergency room doctors who, specialize in almost everything, but, a doctor who specializes in obstetrics and gynecology. And this doctor tells us, listen, this is not a viable pregnancy. And, you have some options. I think that, it's passing on its own because of, for whatever reason, your body knows that it can't sustain this pregnancy. And my husband and I are completely floored. Here we are again in the doctor's office looking at a sonogram of something that we were so excited about, and it's done. And, having to go through that for the third time, the second time together. And about this stage, I think I was about 7 or 8 weeks. I think I was 8 weeks. The issue with this pregnancy was that the following day after the doctor's appointment, we were told that our pregnancy hormone levels had went up by about another 1,000, and that the doctor was very nervous that I could be experiencing an ectopic pregnancy of unknown location, which is very scary. Because if it is not treated or if it's not removed surgically, we can die. And knowing that we're not just talking about losing a baby, but potentially losing your life through our worlds completely upside down. And I had to decide to sit it out or to knowingly terminate a pregnancy, which, as a person who is a Christian and believes in life and wanted a pregnancy, was one of the hardest decisions that I've ever had to make. And we decided that, we would terminate the pregnancy. And it was horrible. The pain that I was in from taking these pills and, the inner turmoil, the emotional state, trying to figure out if you've made the best decision or if there is, some miracle that would have happened or could have happened. And, you just go through all of these things. My husband's been so supportive and, we've talked through it. My mother-in-law and my mom, were very supportive. But this was different than just a regular miscarriage that resulted or resolved itself naturally or a DNC. This was me actively terminating something that I wanted. I went back to the doctor and that didn't work. And I think that's one of the things that no one really talks about miscarriage or pregnancy loss, but there are even fewer conversations about ectopic pregnancy. And it is the most scariest thing that I've probably ever had to deal with in my entire life. I went back to the doctor and my levels had gone up, even though I had taken the medication. I had to go back and forth through to the lab to get blood work done almost every other day. And then I actually had to have a dose of methotrexate, which is chemotherapy. And that, again, put me in a place where, I had to go to a cancer ward and I'm sitting there with people who are fighting for their lives. And here I am having to really, really fight for my life, but also terminate this pregnancy for the second time. So I'm like, okay, Laura, I do not know what you're teaching me during this moment in my life, but I am here. Here I am. I'm vulnerable. I'm trying to figure out what's going on. And from there, all of this, my ectopic pregnancy took about 6 weeks to resolve it. So I ended up having to have surgery. And while ectopic pregnancies are probably, I think, like 1 or 2% of pregnancies, what I had was a corneal ectopic pregnancy, which is even less than that. And my doctor didn't even see it until I had to have surgery. I had to have another DNC. And so our world was rocked. This time we're trying to figure out, like, what are we doing? Is this, what are we doing? How are we going to move forward? Is this it? What do we want to do? And the biggest difference about having an ectopic pregnancy versus maybe a DNC or a spontaneous miscarriage is that if you are treated with methotrexate, it kills the folic acid in your body, and you can't conceive for 12 weeks because it takes 12 weeks from reaching zero. The pregnancy hormone has to be at zero, and then 12 weeks you can't try to conceive a baby. And so there's a lot of downtime, and you have to figure out, not only what if I have another miscarriage if we try again, but what if I have another ectopic pregnancy? And, all of those type of feelings. It is the roughest patch in the world. And this time around, I think my husband felt it a lot more than he's felt it before because, I could have died. My health, it was not just the health of a child, but my health, and not having my tube rupture or not having my uterus rupture and then internal bleeding. And, he's having to take on a lot more at home because I have to take it easy. And then he's also having, all these emotions about his wife, the one that he wants to have kids with, not the one that he wants to be without. And so, we have had a lot of things go on. A lot of things go on. And it's just been a crazy, journey. And we're almost at the end of our 12 weeks, and we've talked through a lot of different things. I don't know if we have an answer just yet, but just an answer to keep taking it one day at a time, not to get ahead of ourselves. And, continuously being thankful that we have grown together. One of the things, and I know there are many statistics out there that relationships that experience loss usually end up in divorce or breaking up. And, we're still here. We're still here together, supporting each other, dealing with grief as it comes, trying to figure out ways in which to get the help that we need. So that's my story.
So much for sharing that.
Today's podcast episode is sponsored by Living Waters Doula Services. Out of her belly will flow rivers of living water. Rivers carry life and bring it forth to those who need it. I am excited to begin offering Living Waters Doula Services to my sisters-in-laws. What is a doula? A doula is a non-clinically trained support person who provides emotional, physical, and informational assistance before, during, and after childbirth. My goal as your doula is to help you heal, remove anxiety and fear, and find peace and hope on your infertility and pregnancy journey. If you are currently trying to conceive and would like fertility support, if you are currently pregnant after loss, or if you want grief support for your recent loss, I'm available to share space with you as your doula and support you on this journey. For more details about Living Waters Doula Services, visit ericamcafee.com/doula. That is ericamcafee.com/DOULA. I'm excited to share space with you.
I want to circle back to you saying the type of ectopic pregnancy you had and what is in it, and if you can explain that a little bit more in detail.
Yes. So I believe it's pronounced corneal ectopic pregnancy. It is found in like the upmost corner of your uterus, which is kind of hard to be seen sometimes. And so usually it's missed. And the way that my doctor found it was when he used a MyoSure, which is like a camera that they stick inside your uterus when they're doing a DNC. And he was able to see where it was. So it was in my right side of my uterus, close to my tubes, but not necessarily in my tube, but in the corner of my uterus.
That. So I would like to talk about just how you have healed throughout this process just your whole grieving and healing process and kind of where you are now, and just really how your faith has played a role throughout each of your different losses. And then now having that thought process, I heard you talk about just that thought process is a little different, that, you know, this is a baby that you wanted and you actually had to electively terminate in order to save your life. So talk us through just really how you have been processing your grief.
I will say one of the things, I'm a Facebook person. I've been on Facebook since college when it, first opened. And the Facebook groups have really gotten me through a lot of the grief. To know that there are women out there who are experiencing the same things as I am I don't even think I ever knew that there was a term called secondary infertility. I think a lot of times, and especially within my own culture, that because this isn't something that is necessarily shared, I mean, you may know of relatives who couldn't have children or didn't have children. You may not have known why, but I've never heard of family members who had children and wanted more and weren't able to have them. And so when I learned of the term secondary infertility, it really was earlier in 2018 when I went to see the specialist. And they were like, some women just have had babies and they can't have them anymore. And so I searched for a secondary infertility group on Facebook, and I just looked through there to see what people were posting and, how it was and different type of things like that. I also have participated in the October Pregnancy Loss, Stillborn, and Miscarriage Awareness Month with, just sharing my story as it comes. I post on my due dates. And I will tell you, one of my family members is a nurse and also a grief counselor and a minister. And so she gave my mom pamphlets and like a little things that she put together about grief, and my mom got it to me. And so one of the things that I did was she encouraged me to name my babies. And she said that giving them a name helps you to process your grief so that when you're thinking about them, it can, help you to not for closure, but to think about it in a positive way, that these babies were wanted and they were loved, even though you theoretically didn't get to meet them. And so that's what I did for the first two. It took me about maybe 2 years to do that. I just thought at first, I was like, this is so foolish. People aren't going to understand this. This doesn't make any sense. Like I understand if you deliver actually a baby, but I just had a miscarriage. These losses don't really count. And I got to the point where I did it. And I did it for me because I needed that. I didn't realize how much I needed to have a certificate that for me meant that there was a baby that I carried, even if it was only for, 6 weeks. As soon as I saw that positive line, I was pregnant. It didn't matter whether it was, one day that I was pregnant or if I was pregnant and had delivered a full-term baby. That baby was wanted and that baby was cherished from the beginning. And so I've done that. That was one of the ways that I dealt with my grief, was having these certificates made, continuously posting, about my struggles, and not in a woe is me way, but in a way that is, this is just my journey, and also letting people know how to react to people or to women or families who experience loss. A lot of times people want to fix. People want to get you to the other side, and that's not necessarily what's needed. When I share that I have a struggle, I don't want anybody to fix it. I'm just venting or getting out the words of how I'm feeling. And, I've posted a lot of time, one post that I put in particular said, if you know anyone who has dealt with loss of any kind, sometimes all they need is a smile and a hug. That's it. Someone to sit with, just to listen. And I think a lot of times we are usually wanting to help. And by help, that means to say or do or to encourage or uplift or pray. And when we do that, sometimes we may say hurtful things. I've had people tell me that, I should be so glad that I already have 2 children. You know, some people don't even have one. I've had some people pray for me and tell me in the prayer to focus on the miracles that I already have. And my thing is that my 2 living children don't take away from the losses that I felt. They don't, not at all. They don't. It's just a part of my story. And I don't necessarily feel like I have to get over these. I don't have to get over them. I am certain that even when I'm 50 or 60, and even if I have one more kid or no more kids, I'll still be thinking about the what ifs and the how old they would be and those type of things. But it doesn't take away from the little blessings that I already have running around my house. And that's all that I want people to understand. And I think the other part for me, which was hard in my grief process, was dealing with my losses, knowing that I did have kids. I think for me, that was another part where I felt embarrassed and ashamed and guilt, that I recognize that there are families who are dealing with primary infertility and they don't have children. And I had to let that go. You know, I had to let that go, that, you know, I can still mourn and grieve and still empathize for people who don't have children, as well as, you know, have in common with people who are experiencing secondary fertility after only having one child versus me having 2 children and experiencing this. I would say the things that have been the most helpful for me is last year, my husband and I went to Grief Share at a church, and we talked through grieving and what that looks like, and gave ourselves permission to not put grief on a timeline, that we have to be done grieving in 3 months so that we can move on with our lives. But it also gave us, you know, wisdom to say that some things are inappropriate as far as grieving. If you find yourself, you know, for more than what you personally deem as necessary, having these overwhelming feelings, you may need to get some more help. And I feel like going through that with him, talking and going through Grief Share with him. And then we also got, you know, some family therapy through this last ectopic pregnancy was very, very helpful, as well as talking and being upset, I would say, with God. And I don't necessarily, I think that those are one of the things that I feel like I still struggle with the most, is the being upset that this is here where I am. And that comes and goes. I think that there are days when I'm just like, girl, this is just a part of your story. And you are here, you know, giving light, shedding light to this story and encouraging other women who may feel alone. And then I go to moments of, why does it have to be me? Or why am I the one who is experiencing this? One of the hardest things, the probably epitome of hardest things, was that the day that I went in, because with my ectopic pregnancy, my numbers weren't going down as fast as they would like them. And I was having a lot of bleeding and almost needed to have a blood transfusion because I was losing so much blood. The day that I had to have my DNC was the same day that my younger sister had a baby. And my mom was trying to support both of us. So she had one daughter who was going into, you know, say completely goodbye to a pregnancy, and one daughter who was saying hello to a new baby. And that probably was one of the hardest things to have to deal with and reconcile in your brain, and then also to talk to God through. How is this our journey? How is this my journey? And at the end of the day, finding the joy in that reminding myself that God doesn't create mistakes. He creates opportunities and ways in which he allows us to grow and to mature and to be tested and tried and to move through things and continue to be who he's called us to be, with or without, you know, a new baby or not. And so I think that for me, that has been the biggest part, is reminding myself that it's okay to be upset and it's okay to be disappointed, but it's also a part of my story, my journey, which is going to be way different than anyone else's.
Absolutely. So throughout this process, did you share with your babies, your two children, what you were going through? Or was it more or less they just see it because they were just around you, or they knew that you had surgery and you came home? Were you open to them? I know you said you weren't really open with your family, but were you open with them? And then what advice could you give the moms out there who have had miscarriages and how they should continue to talk to their kids about the babies that were lost and, continue to hold their memories today?
So I have two very observant children. During my first and second miscarriage, my daughter, who at the time was 4 and 5, saw me buying prenatal vitamins and it had a pregnant lady on it. And she was like, I think there's a baby in your stomach. And I was like, and I think I may have changed the subject. We lost that baby. I don't think we even acknowledged it. But one of the things that we did do is we participated in the March of Dimes walk. And when our kids asked us, well, what is March of Dimes? We explained to them, that March of Dimes is an organization that helps mommies and babies. And so they just put it together. They were like, you mean like the baby, our baby that's in heaven? And I was like, yeah. And so my husband and I were trying to figure out how they figured out that maybe we had a baby and the baby was in heaven. And I don't think that we asked them because we didn't know how to engage in a discussion with I think my daughter was 5 at the time and my son must have been 3. And so we just let them figure it out on their own without trying to maybe give them adult words. This last time, because it was about a couple of months ago, and I would say that this loss trickled on, and I actually started this loss, and we went to my daughter had just had her 8th birthday, and we spent her birthday weekend. I spent it in the hospital in the ER, and that was really difficult. We didn't talk through it, but they knew that something was going on with mommy. And I just kept telling them that mommy's just trying to get better. Mommy's just trying to get better. And they could tell that something was different. And so I still, again, never said that I had an ectopic pregnancy or any of those type of things, but I was just very gentle with them. The advice that I would give to parents who are dealing with secondary infertility or losses that also have children is I think you have to gauge what you're comfortable with your children. We, in my family, because of our certificates, we talk about it a little bit, but not like the gruesome details. With the 3 certificates that we have, I just tell my kids that these were babies that mommy wasn't able to deliver, but they're in heaven. And so they take that for whatever it means to them. And I know we continue, like this year, we'll also participate in the March of Dimes walk. And I think that, at least for me, that's the part that helps, is that while they may not completely understand the concept of heaven, they do understand the concept of organization that helps mommies and babies. And, if they can do something that is helpful, because my son really wants to be a big brother. He just kept saying, well, when you get better, mommy, and then you can have another baby. And I just say to him, I am hopeful and hope that we can do that. But, they don't really, I didn't really share all of that with them. I didn't want to give them that pressure. And I also didn't want them to, I guess, have to deal with that. I don't know how they would react to something like there was a baby in mommy's stomach and the baby didn't make it. So my advice is I think you have to judge where your kids are. I mean, if they're a lot older, maybe preteens or teenagers, you can maybe share a little bit more. But for my kids who were 3 and 4, and then now 6 and 8, when I had these losses through those years, we shared very minimally.
Thank you for sharing that. So you mentioned a few books earlier that were great resources and tools for you. Were there any other books, Facebook groups, podcasts that were great resources for you throughout your grief journey?
Yes, I would say that I found your Facebook group, Sisters in Loss, because I was looking for a group that catered to Black women because I'm a Black woman. And I felt like when I posted to some of the other groups I was in that my questions or things weren't necessarily answered, and not to put anything out there. I just started to look for more things where I felt like I would be accepted or be able to speak freely and others would be there to support. So I'm in Sisters in Loss. I'm also in Fertility for Colored Girls. When I was diagnosed with my ectopic pregnancy, I am in an ectopic pregnancy support group, which by far has probably been one of the main things that I have dealt with, or support groups that I have been in that has been amazing for that specific type of loss. That group really understood me saying that I had to really wrestle with having to terminate something that I wanted. Very, very tender group members in there, definitely encouraging and things like that. And I think that might be it. I'm also in some other groups for trying to conceive and pregnancy after loss, but I'm not sure if I'll continue to be in those groups. I guess it just depends on if we continue or what we decide. I don't necessarily know if we're 100% on our decision after this loss.
Absolutely. So I would like to know, your mom, what do you do for self-care?
I will tell you, in December, I have locks, and usually I do them myself. I maintain them myself. But in December, I told myself that I had been, through so much, and I really took myself to my favorite salon and got my locks maintained and colored because that is what I wanted to do. Another thing that I do for self-care, believe it or not, is listen to podcasts. I think there's something about, like I said, learning or hearing other people's perspectives on whatever it is that they are talking about. I just find very, very, very interesting. So I've listened to podcasts with my kids about different scientific things. I listen to politics podcasts. I listen to the Enneagram podcast. I listen to a lot of different kinds of podcasts just to, give myself a moment to just listen and hear people. And I also listen to a lot of audiobooks as well. I don't know if that is what most people define as self-care, but it is one for me. I just like to relax and just listen and figure out what else is going on. What are other things that I could know, to stash away in my mental toolbox that, maybe later on in life I can pull out randomly. But those are the things that I do for self-care.
I concur. I am a huge podcast listener and audio listener too. So Thank you for sharing that. So I would like to end the podcast with you just giving our listeners some encouraging words for those moms who are battling secondary infertility and are in the wait, waiting on God's blessing. What encouraging words can you leave with them as they are going through this waiting process?
My words would be to continue to ask questions and do research. And if you feel like you're not getting anywhere, switch doctors. I think that as women and as believers, we oftentimes have discernment within our spirits that's saying something isn't right. And, not all the time doctors are in our corners to figure that part out. And I think that was one of the lessons that I learned was to not take their word for it, but to get another opinion, to figure out if this doctor or this person was really doing all they could do for me, or if they just didn't want to do it. And so what I did was go to another doctor. One of the other things that I would do is deal with the grief. I think that that's hard to continue to be a involved mommy who's also grieving. And one of the best things my husband and I did was join Grief Share as well as get family counseling for all of us, for my husband and I, and even for our kids. Because even if we didn't tell our kids what was going on, they knew that something was going on. And so we really made it a point to go to counseling and to go to Grief Share at our church and to continue to check in with each other. I've checked in with my husband. There aren't as many resources out there for men as there are for women. And so sometimes I just ask him how he's doing, when different things come up that are, hard for him, I just check in and ask him, are you okay? How are you? How are you feeling about this or that? And just continue to be present. I think that those are, the things that I would encourage women to do.
So much, Jessica, for being on the podcast. So where can we find you on social?
So I am starting a new project, Accomplished Black Woman. So my social media is Accomplished BW on Instagram. I also have, that's my email address as well, accomplishedbw@gmail.com. And so those are two ways that you can get in contact with me.
So much for being on the podcast and sharing your journey. I know that this is going to be a blessing for so many women out there.
Thank you. This has already been a blessing for me and during my journey. So I definitely am glad that I got to talk with you.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. I pray that this show was inspirational and a blessing to you. For show notes, visit ericamcafee.com/podcast. Please join us in our offline discussions in our private Facebook group by going to sistersinloss.com. If you're listening in Apple Podcasts, please rate and subscribe to us and leave us a 5-star review. I pray that you all have a blessed week. Keep the faith, and I'll talk to you next Wednesday.